Rafael Nadal announced that he will retire from professional tennis after the Davis Cup finals this year. And I couldn't be more grateful for Nadal because he provided me with so much entertainment in the last 20 plus years. Rafael Nadal played his first Futures match in 2001, where he lost to Sergio Reutemann in the first round of the qualies. Now, Nadal was only 15 years old at this time, and in that 2001 season, he was already winning some matches in the qualies, which is pretty impressive. Then in 2002, an unbelievable jump in level where Nadal started winning Futures tournaments. In 2003, Nadal started playing some challengers and was doing really well, and he started having some success on the main tour as well, reaching the round of 16 in Monte Carlo, losing to Coria, going through the qualies. And he also made the round of 16 in Hamburg, which was a Masters Series tournament at that time, also going through the qualies. He made the semifinals of Umag, won a challenger in Segovia, and finished the year ranked 49 in the world. In 2004, the whole world became aware of Nadal because he was able to beat Roger Federer, who was #1 in the world at this moment in time in the second round of the tournament in Miami. Now, just to get a feel of how long Nadal has been on tour, he actually played Ivanisevic twice in the 2004 season. But it was in 2004 when Nadal suffered a bad injury and he wasn't able to play the French Open in that year. He did, however, win his first tournament late in the clay court season in Poland. Interestingly, Nadal finished the 2004 season ranked 2 spots lower than in the previous season, possibly related to his injury and missing a lot of tournaments. But once 2005 came around, we saw a rampaging Rafael Nadal that started dominating clay court tournaments like we've never seen before in the history of tennis. So he won a tournament in Brazil on clay in February. He also won a tournament on clay in Acapulco in February. He skipped Indian Wells and then played a phenomenal match against Roger Federer in the Miami final. This is one of the most legendary matches that Nadal has ever played. He was up 2-0 on Federer, who was the heavy favorite in this match, and Federer ended up pulling this match out in 5 sets. But once Nadal stepped foot on the courts of Monte Carlo, it was rampage time. In 2005, Nadal won Monte Carlo, Barcelona, Rome, and the French Open. Now, he didn't do well on grass that year, losing to Vasque in Halle and Jill Mueller in Wimbledon, but he then won Bastad, Stuttgart on clay. Nadal won the Canada Masters by beating Agassi in the final. That's how long Nadal has been playing on tour. He then won Beijing, and one of my favorite matches of Nadal was the Madrid Masters final against Ljubicic indoors. So Nadal finished the 2005 season ranked #2 in the world, and it was clear that this guy could possibly be one of the greatest players of all time. And 2005 was also the year when I became a super fan of Rafael Nadal. And see, the thing is, I generally like aggressive players, big servers. I was a big Pete Sampras fan. I find it so interesting how players like Sampras, Ivanisevic, or maybe even John Isner or Ivo Karlovic construct matches by maybe getting one break per set and serving the rest of the set out. To me, it's super interesting to watch that. So Nadal's game is the complete opposite of that. I can't really identify with it. It's a grinder game that's based on baseline tennis, but Nadal is a versatile player, one of the best volleyers. He has an excellent transition game and one of the best overheads of all time, especially the Rafa 360 overhead. But even though I couldn't really identify with his game, I found it so fun to watch because it wasn't only the way he hit the ball by going around his head this way, which was very unique. Also, his fighting spirit was so fun to watch. He never gave up. He could be down love 5 in the 5th set and he still would be fist pumping. He had a very positive attitude on the court. He seemed like a very humble guy who was very nice and respectful to everyone. I thought that Rafa was a great role model for young players. Rafa never threw a racket throughout his entire career, but I also loved some of the quirks that Nadal had. The way he was arranging his water bottles, the way he had all his little ticks before he served. I love the Nadal logo, but I also love the clothes that Nadal was wearing. I love the shoes. I loved his racket. I bought a bunch of those rackets. Believe me, my daughter played with that racket, and I tried really hard to learn to play with that racket. The one thing I didn't like about Nadal was the fact that the shorts started getting shorter and shorter and more difficult to pull off. So Nadal's entire aura as a tennis player made me a super fan. I can tell you that I've been a sports fan my whole life, and I'm a passionate sports fan, whether it's the Croatian national team, whether it's the Chicago Bulls with Kukoc, Rodman, and Jordan on the team, three of my favorite basketball players of all time, whether it's other tennis players. I have never been so attached to watching a player and also so affected by a player winning or losing. I can tell you that when Nadal would lose a match, I would be in a funk, in a bad mood, and it would be as if I lost the match. Now, if Nadal lost an important match, maybe a thriller in the final of a Grand Slam, I would be in a funk for days. But also, when Nadal would win important matches, this was some of the most amazing memories that I have. And throughout all these years, I was able to connect with other Rafa superfans, and we stay in touch and we talk about Rafa a lot. We talk about when he's doing well, we talk about when he's doing poorly, and there was a lot of talks about the perfect way for Nadal to retire. And look, it's really difficult to find the perfect way to retire. I thought the way Roger did it at the Laver Cup was awesome, and I think Nadal doing it for Spain, playing Davis Cup in Spain, is going to be great. But I recently had a long conversation with one of my fellow Rafa superfans, and we both were in agreement that Rafa needs a lot of matches. And I think what Rafa tried to do this year by coming back in Brisbane is play a full season, and that would have given him a much better chance at the French Open and also at the Olympics. But unfortunately, that did not happen. Rafa played in Brisbane, and I thought that he was a completely different player in Brisbane compared to the clay court season. I thought that he was much better in Brisbane, but something happened. He got hurt again, and that affected not only his body but also his confidence, because I heard that Rafa said that he lost the belief in his game, that he was losing to kids at his academy, and that the lack of matches was starting to affect him very badly on the court. And so the clay court season rolls around, and Rafa was not the same player that we've seen before. He was a shadow of his former self. He did not play a good clay court season. I thought that Rafa did play pretty well against Zverev at the French Open. That was probably the best match he's played this year. So for Rafa to try to do the same thing next year, but not playing at all, and to jump into the tour somewhere before the clay court season, we're going to see results that are probably even worse than this year. Because Nadal, in my opinion, is one of these players that needs a lot of matches. If you look through the seasons where Nadal was doing really well, you can see how Nadal builds up confidence and he wins many consecutive matches, many consecutive tournaments. And when Nadal is in these little losing slumps, they do continue for a little while before he wins something big again and he goes on another run again. So without having that confidence from winning consecutive matches, there are very little chances that Nadal was going to have if he tried to play another French Open in 2025. And on top of all that, I do think that physically Nadal is not the same player that he was even in Brisbane. But if you compare him to the spectacular season that he had in 22, where he won 2 Grand Slam tournaments, that Rafa from 2022 compared to the Rafa now, there's a huge difference in physical fitness. So I think the injuries that he's had throughout his career have taken a huge toll. And a lot of the naysayers were saying back in those early Rafa days, 2005, 2006, that Rafa is not going to last on tour. He's going to retire. He's going to get hurt. And they were right in the fact that Rafa was going to get hurt, but they were completely wrong in the fact that Rafa was not going to last, because Rafa lasted a long time on tour. For 17 years, Rafa was ranked in the top 10 in the world. Let that sink in. 17 years in a row, top 10 in the world. So as a Rafa fan, I got to enjoy a lot of happy memories that I share with other Rafa fans. I'm going to tell you the 2 that stick out as the most happy ones, where I was going absolutely crazy. And let's get back to 2005 when Nadal was dominating. He was starting to do really well on hard court. He made the Miami final, almost beat Federer. He beat Agassi in the Canada final. And so people couldn't really say that Nadal can't play on hard court, but they could say that Nadal has no chance on grass. And when Nadal started doing better on grass, this is where I was getting so pumped. And then in 2008, when Nadal finally, after losing in a final to Federer, was able to beat Federer in one of the best matches in the history of tennis, I was so unbelievably happy. And that happiness lasted for a while. I have never forgotten that match in 2008. And as nerve-wracking as the matches were when Nadal played Federer, they were a lot worse when Nadal played Djokovic. I could not even watch a lot of these matches. I did watch them on replay 2 or 3 times sometimes, but watching it live was impossible. I would usually watch it on an app in another room, or I would go driving around and I would just follow the score because I couldn't bear to watch those matches. This is how nervous I was. And the happiest I've ever was when Nadal beat Djokovic, and I remember this vividly. It was in 2013 in the French Open semifinals when Nadal won 9-7 in the fifth against Djokovic. And that entire season in 2013 was like a dream. Nadal won the French, and then he went on an absolute rampage on hard court and won Canada, Cincinnati, and the US Open. In the semis of Canada, he beat Djokovic 7-6 in the third. In the quarters of Cincinnati, he beat Federer 6-3 in the third. And in the final of the US Open, he beat Djokovic in 4 sets. Nadal also reached the final of the ATP World Tour Finals that year, a tournament that he's never won. And he did beat Roger in the semi-final 7-5, 6-3, but he did end up losing to Djokovic in the final 6-3, 6-4. And Nadal has had chances to win the ATP World Tour Finals indoors. The stigma still sits with him today where people say Nadal doesn't know how to play indoors. But I remember I told you he beat Ljubicic in Madrid indoors. That was a Master Series tournament. And he made the ATP World Tour finals, so he obviously knows how to play indoors. But I do think that Federer and Djokovic are a little bit better indoors compared to Rafa. And I'm not sad at all about Rafa retiring. I think it's the right decision. I think it would be tough if he tried to play in 2025, as I previously explained. And I want him to be happy. I want his family to be happy. Now, I do want to say that Novak Djokovic wrote a beautiful message on social media to Nadal. I've always believed what he said in these messages to be true, that it was Nadal that made Djokovic a better player. He pushed him to the absolute limit. If it wasn't for Nadal, Djokovic wouldn't be the player that he is today. In my opinion, when Djokovic played Nadal in the most important stages of tournaments, that is the highest level of tennis that I've seen. The best match that these two guys have played against each other is the 2009 Madrid semifinals. That is the best match that I've ever seen. And I'm super excited to one final time watch Rafa in Davis Cup, and Alcaraz is going to be on the team, and maybe they are going to play doubles together. It's going to be super exciting. And I'm going to be right there cheering him on. Hopefully this time watching it live and not following the score on the app.